I first want to introduce everybody to Dr. Koss. So on my far left, we have Ms. Deborah Evans, trustee.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Ken Ferguson, our treasurer. Nice to meet you. Ms. Julie Bailey, our secretary. Welcome. Good evening. Thank you. This is Ms. Carol Finkelstein, a trustee, and Ms. Chrissy Forehand, a trustee. Dr. Hirsch, our vice president, couldn't be here this week. And I'm Stacy Brickman. I'm the board president. So we welcome you to West Bloomfield. And so good evening. On behalf of the West Bloomfield School District, I'd like to welcome Catherine Koss to this interview for the position of superintendent. Dr. Koss is superintendent of Wyandotte Public Schools in Wyandotte, Michigan. I'll take a few moments to briefly describe our format. The interview may take up to 90 minutes. There will be 22 questions from the board. Toward the end of the interview, time permitting, we will give you the opportunity to ask questions of the board and make a closing statement. We will let you know if time is becoming an issue and there is a need to pick up the pace so that we can get through the questions and the responses. As the board hears from each candidate and weighs this critical decision, it will be doing so through the lens of the candidate profile that was developed with considerable input from our stakeholders. Our intent is to identify the candidate that best fits the profile, which board members have at hand. For those present in our audience, you may submit feedback by way of form provided for this purpose. They are over by the water and coffee stand. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the Board of Education, as the elected representatives of our community, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in the process. So welcome, and we will get right into our opening question. Dr. Koss, while we have had the opportunity to review your application materials, audience members have not. Please briefly review your background and share what causes you to be interested in this position at this point in your career.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you. My board at home just filled a vacancy on their board, and I know what went into that, and this is like tenfold that. So I know that you have spent a lot of time and a lot of talking, and I know that that's a big task for all of you that perhaps you didn't see coming a year ago. So I'm proud to have been chosen. I think that I don't know, that was just very nice to know that perhaps my credentials were a good match for what you were looking for. And this opportunity, I hope, will give you a chance to feel and see and hear who I am as a leader, because I really do love what I do. So for the benefit of those who have not been able to see my resume, I started out in Saline, Michigan with my family. I went to U of M after that. I was a math major because I loved math and teaching. I had done a lot of coaching, and so it was a natural fit to teach. My first year as a teacher, I had my youngest sister as a student, and she got C's, much to my chagrin. So I taught in Saline, I taught at Detroit Country Day, I taught in Farmington, and I really started undertaking some leadership roles and started back at my master's, and thought maybe leadership would be a good thing if I was like a North Central chair or a department chair, which I ended up being. I never wanted to be an administrator. I never thought I'd be a superintendent, but I'm here because of people who are good mentors to me. And one of those individuals tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you'd be a good assistant principal. So I became an assistant principal at Farmington High School. After that, I was the principal of Troy Athens High School. At the time, we had 2,400 students. My goal was to get graduation under 2.5 hours. And I really loved that job. Everything from being in the cafeteria, well, maybe I didn't like the dances so much, but I liked working with teachers. I liked working with parents. It was it was just a nice role for me. I moved back to Farmington as assistant superintendent. I was their Scott. And so I did many of the same roles and responsibilities that he does here for you. I was fortunate enough to then become the superintendent in Wyandotte 8 years ago. And a lot of people know Wyandotte because we have an art fair. It's the second biggest art fair in the state, next to Ann Arbor's. And really it's 45 minutes just south of here. It's just south of Detroit. It's on the Detroit River, which I just love. We have a crew team, for example, and there's many unique characteristics of the community where I serve. We have 10 schools, 4,650 students right now. It has been a great opportunity, and something that was difficult was for me to think about leaving there. I chose to apply because your district is one of the best-known districts in the state. As I drove by the middle school construction, I was just in awe. I know you to be very progressive. Through COVID, for example, we looked at West Bloomfield's information that was going home to your parents because of your cutting edge, because of your decisiveness and putting students first. So that's what drew me to be here tonight. I know you have 3 great candidates, and I'm proud to have been selected. So thank you.
Thank you. What are the immediate challenges you would expect to face as our superintendent within your first 90 days of the job? Given these, tell us how you would hit the ground running on your first day and be ready to address those challenges.
So the first 90 days, I think the most important thing for me to do is develop relationships. And that includes relationships with the board, both individually and as a whole. I think it's important for me to develop relationships with the central office staff, with school administrators, teachers, union leaders, as well as the community. I think that's my role, being the face of the district. So I need to develop some of those strong relationships and open door policies so that I can get a feel for where things are right now. I would not change anything right away. I would really get a lay of the land and then assess with all of you where you think our next steps should be. Your question asked, what would be the biggest challenges probably? So July and August, summer, I think about staffing. Staffing shortages are a hard thing to come by. And so we would need to make sure that we're ready to open the doors once school started. Budget is always tricky. And when will the state finalize the budget? How will we know how much we have per pupil? How will we know how we're going to spend that? The ESSER dollars are still in effect, which is helpful, but we also have to sustain that. Meaning if we have created lots of changes, what is our long-term plan for those? Because ESSER dollars will be finite. They'll be ending in 2024. So I think relationships, staffing, and budget are probably the three big things.
Given your research on our district, what do you believe are the 2 or 3 most critical long-term priorities our district will need to address? How would your background and skills help us address these priorities?
First and foremost, we are in the business of educating all students. And that word all is very important to me. And so achievement is I think one of our number 1 priorities, or it should be. I'm aware of, for example, the African American Parent Network starting over again, or recently, and I think about achievement gaps, not just for that segment, but for all students, low socioeconomic, special ed. And so achievement for all means that we're identifying groups, subgroups that might need extra support. I watched a meeting where there were some courses proposed, I think in December, and it just gave me goosebumps to think that you are forward thinking about how do we get students who are low in credits back on track. And things like that are something that is a phenomenal start, and we just have to keep maintaining that. My background and my passion is curriculum and instruction and assessment. Coupled with my math degree, looking at data is kind of a nice pastime for me to see where are we making headway, where are we not. We hired some reading interventionists just this year. So we're trying to see, are we getting our bang for the buck for that? Are they making a difference? So aligning our resources with what best practice says to close those achievement gaps. I think another, I think you asked for two. Another area is social emotional learning. Our staff, our students have really had a hard time these last 2 years. And as much as we'd like to think school is normal, it's not. And it's likely going to take 3 to 5 years to help both staff, students get back to 100%. It's been hard.
Thank you. Ms. Beatty. Yes, thank you. Good evening. What is the most difficult situation you have had to deal with in your educational career, and how was it resolved?
So, probably a situation that emerged in Wyandotte, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. There was a man who had a kindergarten daughter who came into my office, and he said, I want to volunteer, but I have a felony. And we do background checks, and that would have been a red flag. There was a process in place where he could appeal to me. And he explained that when he was younger, 24 years ago, he had made some decisions that were horrendous. They weren't anything that involved children, but there was usage and just bad choices. And so he was appealing to me. He said he had been clean for 17 years. He got married, had a little girl. She was in 5th grade, and he wanted to volunteer. I talked to his pastor. I talked to, he owned a company. I talked to some of his employees. And the past practice in Wyandotte was that if there was enough compelling evidence to grant a 1-year temporary volunteering ability. So that's what I did. Fast forward, I think it was 2 years later, come to find out that he had, in fact, hurt children in a sexual way at his house. These were acquaintances that school necessarily didn't have much to do with. The challenging part for me was that social media got a hold of this and connected dots that weren't there. There were angry parents. He had not been in the school for over a year, but parents portrayed this decision I made as one where I let him into a school to find young girls. It was awful. Public comment was relentless. We had board meetings. The board hired an attorney to do an investigation. That investigation was done and found that me nor the principal had violated any board policy. We did not aid and abet him in any way, but by social media it was a different story. So we put some things in place. We have now amended our volunteer policy, and we have allowed no felonies whatsoever. We make sure that everybody completes that form every year, and we've been able to move forward from it. But it was professionally very, very challenging, because I did second guess myself. But yet, on the other hand, I also know that people can turn their lives around, and where's that balance?
Thank you for sharing that. What specific strategies have you employed to nurture and maintain relational trust with others in your organization?
So I read a book, Dave Burgess endorsed it, and it talked about how you reward employees, and how some employees might like one things, like, handwritten notes. Others employees like different things. And that was a big aha for me, because all of a sudden I thought, oh no, here I've been writing Jeff Trudell handwritten notes all this time, and he really, just takes a look, and it doesn't mean much to his heart. So I started bringing Jeff Trudell coffee and just dropping by and saying, Jeff, how are you? I know you've got this, this, and this, do you need any help? So I think one thing is in developing those relationships is speaking employees' languages, if you will. I can go into a principal's office, and he will have every note I've ever written him on his bulletin board. So that said, keep writing him notes. Trust, I think, is embedded in relationships. It's embedded in doing what you say you're going to do. If you say, I'm going to come to your parent meeting and I'm going to be there and I'll handle this, it's me doing that. I think it's acting with integrity. Our special ed director, I had a conversation with her about a difficult decision. And even though it was hard, I could explain why it wasn't the news she wanted to hear. So she at least knew why I was doing something other than what she had wanted me to do. And it's just being authentic.
Can you tell us about one or two most impactful things you have done to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in your current position?
That's really hard, because that was going to be our main focus 2 years ago, right before COVID hit. We had speakers lined up, we had, you name it. And so it's been on the back burner. So I've not been able to do what I had hoped to do, but we have plans in place for next year. Wyandotte is interesting. It's a community that is steeped in tradition, but is changing. Our largest minority is, our largest minority speaks Spanish. So we have a large Hispanic group that we have. African American is next. Oddly enough, we're seeing Muslim families join us as well. And so my struggle right now is I want our teachers, so I see the town changing. And so I want our teachers to be prepared for the parents and the students that are going to be before them, who are different than the population of Wyandotte was even 5 years ago. We have supported groups through things like we looked at who was taking our AP classes and why weren't there more minorities taking AP classes. So we did a push to include and inform that segment of our population, both students and parents, knowing that students who take more AP classes are apt to do better when they get to college. So I'm happy to say that we've increased the enrollment of our minority population in our AP classes. It's things like Gay Straight Alliance. We have that now at we had it at our high school, it's now in our middle school. Pronouns. Pronouns are a big challenge for some of our staff. In hearing from students about how it makes them feel in a classroom when they don't use the pronoun the student has asked them to use. And I found the best thing I can do is for those students who feel comfortable having professional development when our staff can hear from them directly. Not in a mean way, just presenting. This is how this feels to me when I am faced with that situation. Equity is not equal, so it's finding ways for our readers like I have this huge goal of every third grade student. I agree with that state mandate. Every third grade student should be reading at grade level. Mandate or no, that's what we should do. But that doesn't mean it looks the same for everybody. We have students who don't have books at home, so we started Wyandotte Reads, where we were buying books and sending them home so they have them all summer long. They have them during the year. We were buying subscriptions for some students so they could hear, if they're auditory learners, listen. And that's helped our achievement gaps. Oddly enough, our students are very accepting. I sometimes think adults are where we need to have some more focus.
All right, we're going to be talking about some district relations. And number 7, maintaining healthy relationships with school and community stakeholders is important to the Board of Education. Please share with us how you have gone about building and maintaining successful relationships with all members of the school community.
That's a great question. And I think that's at the core of who I am as a leader. I live in Wyandotte. My children attend Wyandotte schools. We moved there when they were in 5th grade. And even through all their events that they're in, be it basketball or a cross-country meet or swim meet, I've been able to be not only a superintendent, but also a parent. And so people, I think, are more apt to be able to come up to me and ask questions if they see I'm at a swim meet, being a timer, just like everybody else. My children are juniors. I have triplets. There's a boy and 2 girls. I would normally say, hey, we're going to move here, but their senior year, they'd kill me. So they're likely going to graduate there and go off to college. But being a parent, I think, also helps me when I'm talking to parents who are very frustrated, because I always come at it as, if I were that parent, how would I want to be treated? A parent came in today to the office. My administrative assistant was at lunch. The other administrative assistant was in a webinar. I happened to be walking down the hall, and there was a parent there who needed a work permit signed. And so, in talking to her, her son had stopped going to school in 10th grade. And this boss needed this work permit signed. So this is awkward. This mom knows her son should be in school. He's not. She's trying to get the work permit signed so he's off the couch, at least doing something, right? And I think she was afraid I was going to judge that situation. But I didn't. So I could go back in my office. I welcomed her in. She sat across from me. I looked up his record in our student information system, could verify his date of birth. He had a birth certificate, everything we needed. So I just signed it and sent her on her way. So that's a small example of just servant leadership. Stephen Covey talks about that, and that's how I approach my job, not only with parents, but staff, students, It's who I am. I would never ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself.
How do you think various stakeholders, such as parents, community members, and staff members, should be involved in our planning process and in setting direction for the district?
I have a colleague who lives in your district and has 2 boys currently enrolled. That's how I got some of your COVID information. She told me there is survey after survey after survey, and she likes it because it's a chance for her to, one, provide input. She knows there are meetings where, you could come and provide input face to face, and she talks about they probably do this over the top, but the end result are things like passing bonds and building a new middle school, knowing how to have hard conversations. And so I think that is a critical thing to continue to do. Dr. Hill was everywhere and so easy to talk with, and I would want to continue that.
How do we create a district-wide and community-wide culture of continuous improvement, planning strategically, and aligning our actions to achieve strategic outcomes?
So I believe you've started your strategic plan. I don't know if it's done or not, but I think that's the first step, and it goes back to, Ken, your question about community involvement and making sure that the decisions we're making are aligned with what's important to the community. So having that strategic plan, which would have goals, which would have methods of assessment, when you would assess those, how you would assess those. In Wyandotte, our strategic plan is we touch it twice a year, myself and the board. We do get stakeholder input at more critical junctures. Not every, we don't go out to the public twice a year, but then with our administrators, which has evolved, we collect data and we say, how did we meet our goals? Are we making progress? What do we need to change? What do we need to add? For example, if the state comes through with more per pupil funding, we will have a list of ways that we can align those increased funds with what our goals are. Somebody told me a long time ago, your checking account should match what your family goals are. So if you're trying to save for a pool in the backyard, you're not going out to eat 3 times a week. So what you're spending your money on should be aligned to your goals, and I think that's no different for us as a district, that what we're spending our money on and what we're planning for is what we know is going to make us serve our students the best.
How do you plan to be highly visible and actively engaged in the district and community?
That's my favorite part. Oh my gosh, I walked, so I went into one of our elementary schools, and we have 4 elementary schools. And I walk in the back door in the staff entrance, and all of a sudden, here is this kindergarten class counting to 51. I don't know why 51 was a big deal, but it was just magical to walk in and hear their voices. So of course I had to go and watch to see for myself, and so it's being able to capture moments like that. Cafeteria is a fun place to see students. If there is an inkling of snow, I bet I could make $500 for every time somebody said, "Is there going to be a snow day tomorrow?" I have a Twitter account, and I don't know, last time I checked, it was over, there's a crazy amount of people who are connected with me on Twitter, but it's mainly students because that's how I announce a snow day. So I try to sneak other fun things in, like you know, study for your exams, they're tomorrow morning. So one, I think just being in schools, not when I need to be, but when I can be. I had a principal when I was a teacher, and it got to the point where if I saw him walking down the hall, I'd go the other way. And I had to think about why that was, and it was because every time I saw him, he was going to ask for something, ask me to do something. So I made a commitment that I need to be in schools and be in classrooms, not when I'm needing something or when I'm asked, but just as a part of my day-to-day. I love going and seeing our 4th hour jazz band. It just makes me smile. And so I know there are regular events. I know that each school has things that are very important, and I would be there. I know that I'd also take that a step further and say it's important for me to be in the community so people know who I am. For example, we have a hospital in Wyandotte, Henry Ford Wyandotte Hospital. I sit on their board. Through that, we were able to get our staff vaccinated in January, ahead of anything else in Wayne County at least. And it was just because of some of those connections, they could help us, and we could take advantage of it. And it was really rewarding to be able to have that opportunity.
Good evening, and thank you for being here, Dr. Cost. We're going to turn the page now to finances. Please describe your experience with millage renewals, bond proposals, and sinking fund proposals. What is the key to the success of each initiative?
So I was hired in Wyandotte 8 years ago. 3 months later, there was a bond proposal. And my operations manager looked at me and said, "They didn't tell you about that, did they?" And so we just rolled up our shirt sleeves, developed a plan, and went out to the community, which as a new superintendent was also nice because I was in the community rec center. I was in the playing bingo with senior citizens and meeting probably constituents I wouldn't have met in the first 3 months. And so that strategy ended up working. Rotary, Kiwanis, you name it. I was there. Anybody who would listen, I would go. So that was my first bond issue. It passed by I think it was 80% voted in favor of it. But it was needed too. So it was something that we could go to the taxpayers and had good reason. Wayne County has something called an enhancement millage, and we have had 2 of those, and that's yielded about $1 million every year. And so again, going to our residents to say this is what it could be used for. We targeted that for technology and actually started our one-to-one program before COVID even was a blip on the screen. So as far as it was important to us to have smart boards for engagement, tools. We talked about closing the achievement gap and having students be able to have Chromebooks at home, getting them internet service for those who didn't have internet at home. Those enhancement millages were terrific. Wyandotte had never had a sinking fund before, and we began planning for one in 2012. 5 years later, it passed, and so we've been able to take a major part of our building maintenance out of the general fund and flag it with sinking fund dollars. And so that's freed our general fund up to do far more.
Thank you. The next question. Please describe your experience with budget development and financial management, including making difficult budget cuts.
So I mentioned that I was in Farmington as an assistant superintendent, and the writing was on the wall as far as our enrollment, and we were not right-sized. We had to cut $18 million out of the budget, and then I think kind of like you all would do, we went to our community and said, what are your ideas? What do you think? How could we do this? What do we prioritize? Matter of fact, one of the schools that we ended up closing was Eagle, which is actually in West Bloomfield, Eagle Elementary. And it wasn't about location, it was more just, it was in such disrepair. And to maintain it as the other ones would have just cost money, and it was just not a good decision to keep it open for those reasons. So we ended up closing 4 elementary schools, and those, as you know, those board meetings are just gut-wrenching. There were 2 administrative sites, 4 schools, 4 elementary schools that closed. We restructured to have different grade levels in different schools, and then ended up redistricting to say who is going to go to what school. And all of that is awful, because inevitably you have a street, and one side of the street ends up somewhere, and another street might end up somewhere else. And for families who have had long traditions, it's probably the hardest thing I've had to do, yet necessary, because you have to be financially stable. You have to. Keeping an elementary school open, I think was $1 million a year at that point. And that's hard on any budget.
Thank you. Another question. What has your district prioritized when allocating ESSER funds, and why? How would you prioritize the use of ESSER funds in West Bloomfield?
So ESSER 3 is different than ESSER 1 and 2. There's an application with ESSER 3, and that application has to be approved. There's a little bit more flexibility with ESSER 1 and 2. So first and foremost, when we were early on with COVID, ventilation was huge, and just are we making sure that students are as safe as they can be? And so we prioritized filtration, not only with new rooftop units, but also with the grade of filters that we were using, so that they're hospital grade. And again, we want our staff, we want our students to be safe. So ventilation was an area that we really strongly focused on. I chose not to go the plexiglass route. I had seen studies that said the particulate, if you have a plexiglass, could easily go up and over. So we did not use funds for that, even though that was hard for teachers, because it was something they could see and feel and be safe. That's how they perceived that. Our research showed it was a little different. So we chose to put money in things that research said was really effective in keeping our schools safe. Learning loss. That was right there with the safety. And how are we going to help these students who have been away from a school environment for a long, long time? And some of them are in homes where, as much as they'd like to be on Zoom, if they were caring for a younger brother or sister, it just wasn't happening. Teachers could not teach as effectively when you're doing that remotely. So how do we get our learning loss? So is it interventionists? Is it coaches for staff, so that they can better have students access the material? Is it parent groups and bringing parent groups in and teaching parents how to support students? Is it having after-school homework help? Is it having homework help from 6 to 9 p.m. for elementary students? And I'll couple that with the social emotional part, hiring of mental health professionals so that students can talk about, learn to interact, and be healthy. Because lots of times that falls back on the school because parents they're doing their best. So how do we help the whole child? Those would be my priorities.
Thank you.
What experience and success have you had with closing the achievement gaps for economically disadvantaged and minority students?
So I had mentioned, looking at data kind of got me all excited. So we administer something called the NWEA, which I believe you're familiar with. Our students take that 3 times a year, in addition to formative and summative assessments that are congruent either by grade level or by department. So like all the biology students would take the same assessments. So NWEA is wonderful because it's a nationally normed test, and you can look at growth projections, and you can see if a class or a grade level is meeting their growth projections. If a student isn't, you can drill down in that and find out where are the gaps. So for example, our teachers work in professional learning communities. If I have 3 4th grade teachers working together to see where their 4th grade students are, they know exactly what they're missing, and they can then divide that up and say, okay, I'm taking these 7 students and working on this, I'm taking these 5 students working on this, and what that does is it catches them up quickly, but it's data informing the instructional needs of students. So for our minority students or our special ed students or our economically disadvantaged students, it doesn't matter because data is data. And interventionists will come in and work with you. This was a great aha moment. I was at an elementary school where they were looking at data, and again, I didn't plan on being there, but I stopped by, I saw these minds working, so I just listened. We had our reading interventionists and our lit coaches talking to our MTSS team, which each school has a team looking to see how student progress is going. And what happened is they identified that the 2nd grade team of teachers was by and large missing out on teaching a skill in reading. So the lit coach said, wait a minute, I'll work with the 2nd grade teachers so they know how to teach this skill, which took all these students who were missing something. Now 80% of them were getting it. The lit interventionists could then work with that 20% who didn't get it. So by teaching practices improving, we can address how we're hitting the mark with our growth goals for our students.
Please give us an example of educational change or reform that you have initiated in your current or previous positions that have led to improvements in student learning.
Oh, this was a fun one. Deborah, not that finance questions aren't so fun. When I was at Farmington, again, we were looking at enrollment projections that were declining. So we thought, how could we attract families? So after a number of surveys, after a number of meetings, we saw a niche that was untamed at that point, and that was to offer the International Baccalaureate program. And we presented to the board. It was a large endeavor to have that application approved by the IB board, but we started it. And so that would have been 16 years ago. So I obviously left. What I'm proud of is that program is still in existence. Next year's graduating class will have 35 seniors graduating from it. So that's an example of students who have an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have had. They go on a mission trip over spring break and work on building schools. And so it's one that gives them perspectives of the world much broader than just where they are. And that I'm proud for.
What is the biggest risk you have taken to do what is right for children?
Increased staffing, mental health, class size, interventionists. And that's a risk because ESSER dollars allowed us to do that. I'm also one that wants to be able to sustain what we start, meaning I didn't want to hire a social worker and then lay him or her off. I had probably 80% of the pieces together, but the 20%, I didn't know how I was going to sustain having multiple social workers in every school. But it was too important not to provide that service to our students. So I was confident that I could sustain the majority of it, was hoping that attrition might naturally, we would have some social workers who I knew were going to retire. We had some teachers I knew were going to retire. So that additional staffing, I hedged my bets on that we could sustain. And it was, what drove it was just, we have to help the students who have been just in such a different learning way to no fault of their own.
What has been the impact of the third grade reading law, and how will you help to ensure that our students are reading at grade level?
So some people were very frustrated with this law when it came down. I look at it as, I think it was this is good practice no matter what, if there's a law or not. Good practice that we have assessments so often to make sure we know when students aren't making the mark, that we have means to help them, be it sending books home, be it working in small groups, be it working after school. We had a great summer program last year, and we taught kids reading without them really knowing it. There was a recipe, there was a cooking class, so they're reading. So the teachers know that the goal is to teach reading, not really to cook, but you're reading a recipe, you're talking about what do these words mean. We had, I think, 6 different courses for ELA and math. Again, if you were to tell kids you're coming to summer school because you're not reading at grade level, they'd head for the hills. But if you tell them, we're going to design these rap songs, they'll buy in a lot better. So, and really that was a staff member's idea, that was a teacher's idea. This is what we could do. And so in listening to staff, that's how we came up with some of these ideas and offerings. So progress monitor, involve parents, develop the IRIP process so that from one year to another year, teachers know what's been done. We have data involving parents to say how important it is to read 20 minutes a night, every night. And I'm a big believer that that's what we should be doing, getting every third grader to read by the time they're done.
I have some questions related to staff and personnel. How would you interact with other administrators in our district? How would you strike a balance between giving them the support and autonomy they need to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary?
That's a big part of this job. And the reason it's a big part is because it impacts so much of what happens in classrooms. So with my administrators, I did something called the levels of decision making. So they know, is this a decision I'm making? Right? Snow days, that's me. But if it's, are we all going to have field day on the same day? That's something that I don't necessarily need to have a say in. But I'd like a chance to have input. So I think I would do something similar if I were to be here. So with the administrative team, talk about levels of decision making, so that everybody knows walking in how this decision is going to be made. Are they giving input? Are they making the decision? Are we making the decision together, or am I making the decision? So that helps, because when situations arise, and they just do, the people, the business of so many people and so many staffs, there are just situations where one group hears something maybe differently than another. So once that's known, that there's a different understanding, or that there's different goals, or it's pulling people together and seeing if we can work it out together. I am the chief negotiator for our 6 unions. I negotiate with them. Our parapros came with a proposal that I think was it just was masterful. And it was nice to be able to have them come to the table with something that solved so many problems, yet accomplished all the things we were trying to work towards. But there are times where I can't agree to something that might get brought to the table through negotiations or another way. I talked about our special ed director and having to tell Cindy today that while I think that idea was good, it's just not the right time. So let's not, throw it all out, but let's work towards it. We just can't do it right now. It is a reality that we're not always going to agree every time, but I think it's important that we can agree to disagree and look at what goal we are really trying to achieve.
Please describe your most successful experience in building a high-performing work team.
Oh my. So on Tuesdays is when I meet with my cabinet. And there are times where we talk about things that make us laugh. There's times where we share tears when someone's wife was diagnosed with cancer. But through it all, we can bring ideas, we can bring situations and say, what do you think? And the trust, the fact that it doesn't always have to be on Tuesday. Matter of fact, last Friday I was struggling with something and I pulled them together. I'm like, I need 15 minutes. So we just sat down and put our heads together and came up with a possibility. And then that led me to be able to go back over the weekend and play with that idea a little bit more. And by Monday it was solved. So it's high performing because it's time bound. We're not there for multiple hours. We all have jobs we have to do, so it's time bound. We know that there's an agenda, but we also know that there are other things on the agenda. It goes deeper than the work. We're people, we're humans, and that's important.
Thank you. Please describe your experience with labor relations and share your perspective on how to best approach bargaining in a collaborative manner.
So I believe you partake in interest-based bargaining, which is what I am most familiar with. I approach it much like our other work. We were in a wonderful, oh my gosh, when COVID first hit, there was rumors of the state taking back money or what the next year might, it was not a good financial outlook. We had a wage reopener. And so I went to, and it's not just me, I have a team, and many of them are my cabinet members. But we went to the unions and said, we'd like just to do a pay freeze for 1 year. Then let's see where we are. So that pay freeze got us through that tumultuous time where they were talking about taking so much money away from our per pupil allotment. The next year we were negotiating again, and we were able to make up for that. And it was because of our employees and the good labor relations that they would be willing to help us out in the short term, knowing we could make good on it in long term. And that's just my teacher's president, union president, is one of my dear friends, and I cherish his friendship more than I do him as a union. Yes, he's the union president, but he is, our relationship is good, even though we don't agree all the time. We figure out grievances or situations that may lead into grievances. So I have, I believe, negotiated 18 contracts and put the district in a good position.
Back to me again. These are about political awareness within education. What impact do you feel the Every Student Succeeds Act is having on Michigan school districts?
Formerly known as No Child Left Behind. That's hard because the pandemic hit, and that's thrown everything into a tailspin, right? So there are some good points, and there are other points that we struggle with. For example, Michigan made a plea not to have student growth data as part of evaluations, and that was denied. And so we had to administer state evaluations to students at an awful time. And that I disagree with. There are parts that are good. We should be looking at growth. We should be looking at performance. It's sometimes once removed by the time it gets to the classroom level.
Thank you. Tell us about your experience with advocating for public education.
One of the neatest memories I will have is testifying in front of the House of Representatives on behalf of ways schools need to acquire funds. Meaning, if you're a school district and something happens to a boiler, you are limited in how you can fix those big ticket items that happen. And I've been part of a team with Johnson Controls who helps us plan, but there are districts that don't have those plans in place. So with Johnson Controls, I was able to go and testify, and just being there was a great opportunity to share how hard it is, because we can't just go to a bank and get a loan. The finance structure in the state ties our hands sometimes. So having firsthand knowledge of that and explaining it to legislators was powerful.
That is our 22 questions, so Very well.
Wow.
Job well done on timing. We'd like to take a few minutes now to provide you with an opportunity to ask any questions you might have for the board.
John has done a wonderful job. I feel very comfortable. I feel remiss that I wasn't able to talk about Portrait of a Graduate or the 4 C's. Those were just such neat ideas to read about on your website. So I know the next step in the process. I know your timelines. At this, maybe it's just a curiosity, is your middle school going to be done on time?
It is on time and on budget during COVID. But we're very proud of that.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. That's a feat. Well, congratulations.
Any other wonderings? So, Dr. Koss, did you want to give a closing statement? We have time. Yeah, we have time for a closing statement.
Well, I thank you for this opportunity. I've brought along some more details about plan of entry, as well as some other letters of recommendation that I'll leave with you. Again, just to give you perspective of how I would approach this transition. I think, opening day with our staff, like all the teachers are there, all the administrators are there, parapros, I told them, I said, the why I do what I do drives every day. Meaning, I get out of bed in the morning because I believe I can make a difference. I believe I can reach those students who depend on us as a school district to help them. And I know as a leader, I am one person, but I can remove barriers so that others can do the work they need to do, which is going to directly impact students. So that has always driven me as an educator, and that's what has me here today, because I would have the chance to impact a greater amount of students in a larger community, and that is certainly exciting. I'm looking for my forever home, meaning I've got, well, the other part of this is I also was married a year and a half ago, or remarried. No, married, remarried. So I was a single parent until my kids were 16. And so getting married again, my husband Sean has 3 boys as well. So we have currently 3 17-year-olds, a 14-year-old, and an 18-year-old. Blaine, who's 18, graduated last year and is now in the Marines and safe. But we have 3 17-year-olds. We're looking at college, and the other thing is I learned that when they got their car, I don't see them as much. They're either up in the room studying, or they're at a practice, they're with friends, they're at the coffee shop studying. So, my time with them is really dwindling. And so I am looking for a place where I can stay, a place where I can make a difference with all of you, and that's really exciting to me.
Thank you for that. So, Dr. Koss, we appreciate your interest in the superintendent positions for West Bloomfield School District. The board is interviewing 3 candidates this week, and we will let you know Wednesday evening where you stand in our search process. And thank you for your participation in this first round interview.
You made it very easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So at this time, I have to go move to public comments, but you're free to get up, Dr. Koss, if you would like.
Can I give you these?
Yes.
Thank you.
It feels weird not shaking your hand, so it's like an air shake,
Let's see.
Do you want me to take Dr. Hirsch's?
Would you mind?
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Do you prefer Catherine? I do. My parents told me Catherine ever since I was young.
Thank you.
And it's just stuck. Except the landscaper guy, they called me Kate when I was.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hugo, do we have any public comments? Does anyone have a public comment? Okay, so this adjourns our meeting for this evening, and we will be back tomorrow evening at 6:30. Thank you to everybody.